I was like,
Who?
you know what I'm saying? Like when you tell people to come, if you're
Yeah,
really
yeah.
like this is it all
Like
week. I'm like,
yesterday.
they take their time.
Like yesterday for DBLA.
Already, I think, too.
Yeah, she said we're live, but that she's
On mute.
or my son.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think so. I don't know.
I think that's it.
The kids look so cute.
She's not in school right now. She's doing her entrepreneur stuff. Oh, what? Right. And that's Val. I think she just realized that she's live.
She's so cute.
Yeah.
It's the red lip for me. I'm like, we all understood the assignment today.
Yes, we did.
Oh, they could hear us. Luckily, we're just giving flowers. We're giving
Right.
flowers. Hey, Benjamin.
How's everybody?
Somebody else. Oh, she said she was going to hide the people that didn't have their cameras on until we started. Thank you, ladies, for doing that.
Of course.
Thank you for having me.
I hope that we literally this will just be a thing. Like we need to have more youth. We need to have more teachers. There used to be more teachers involved, and it's just throughout the years it's just dwindled.
Yeah.
So you ladies go restart that.
Yes.
And I also think there needs to be also like a level of like triangulating or triad or triage. I like to say like not just like teachers, not just teachers and students, but like districts, representatives,
like
school
the
leaders.
school union
Because
guys.
if we're not working together,
Yeah.
then it's always going to be like on the teacher or on the student.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
for this, it's always going to be beholden on us.
Right.
Where were the awards at? Were they in here?
They were under the registration, but like you know how there's like the table that's closed and then there's like another one. Girl, they were like all the way under there.
They're
Like
hidden.
somebody was trying to hide them. I mean, you know, to keep them safe.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm gonna just stop at the post office and mail cards since I could just use the card. So it's funny when I went to the hotel. Oh, we're all squared away at the hotel.
Okay, good.
When I went to the, because Denise doesn't check out till tomorrow, so on the way home I stopped at Spring Hill, but I stopped at Courtyard. So you Oscar, all of you are good.
Okay.
I didn't think to text you, but I texted Lauren and Oscar, and they are. If there's any issues, of course, let me know. But she didn't ask for my ID.
Oh, really?
After all,
I know, right?
I literally like had it out. She didn't, yeah, I like that better. I like the way she put the names at the bottom. I like how you have your responses ready.
Just in case I blink out.
I know those lights are a little overwhelmed.
Like this morning when I was like rushing in. I was like, wow.
When Tiffany called you up, I was like, oh, poor cat. Like, I would be like, you stay there with your good. I already gave I had given the balance and
Oh, okay.
I gave a little bit about our
Mm-hmm.
I said, we poor, we need money.
Mm-hmm.
I
All the time, right?
Yeah. What time does the next session start? Yeah. Okay.
I have too much of it. Angel, can you do me a favor? Can you check what time the next session starts? Is it two? The next session is it 2:20? The next session? Can you check for me? Okay. Okay. We can hear your combo. She texted me. Jess, I think we're ready. Welcome. Can folks online hear me?
Oh, I can definitely hear you.
Awesome. I heard you all was hearing everything. I think there was a couple more people in the studio. Did we lose them? Okay. If folks online, if you're able to turn on your camera so we could get you in the room. Awesome. Welcome everyone to our plenary storytelling from the Frontlines, experiences with racism in education. I'm just introducing our moderator. Our moderator is Miguel Millet, who's online in this very futuristic world we're living in. I'm really, really excited about this plenary. It's something that we've envisioned for a minute. There was actually two kind of groups brainstorming this, and we came together to make this conversation happen. As you know, we've been talking for the last few days around, critical race theory and the ways in which we're protecting our field. And part of the idea of this is to hear directly from youth, from students, from teachers. We have our two maestras here in the front. And then online, we have a group of young folks who are going to engage in a series of questions that Miguel will moderate for us. So just in a second here, he's going to introduce them. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about Miguel. He is one of my doc students at Lewis University who is past his proposal. Yeah. And he's doing his work on the critical race theory and the Higher Education Act. So you will have some good stuff to read very soon. No pressure, Miguel. And he is also a faculty member and staff member at the City Colleges of Chicago. And so I will go ahead and give the mic over to you.
Thank you from that wonderful introduction to my illustrious Professor Erica Davila. So as we all know, there's been a recent attack on CRT in the media, in the courthouse, in our schools. And, we often talk about economic control of land, racial control, but we don't often talk about control of the narrative. And that is a form of oppression that really guides all of the aforementioned isms that I just mentioned. And we have seen this, there's precedent for this. In 2010, the state of Arizona banned ethnic studies from all public schools. Trump recently signed an executive order stating that federal funds couldn't be used to promote CRT in trainings. A lot of states are trying to ban CRT in classrooms. And rather than discuss this solely as administrators and academics, we thought it would be prudent to bring together people on the front lines who are engaged in this work every day, who are using CRT as part of their pedagogical practices, and most importantly, from students who are in the classroom, who are in educational spaces, to get a real frontline perspective on what's actually going on. And we have an incredibly dope panel, so without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. We have Kasha Akhtar. Kasha is currently a junior at Northwestern University studying social policy, mathematical methods in the social sciences, and statistics. She is a first-generation low-income Figley mixed-race student who is also co-president of Quest, a Figley student organization affiliated with QuestBridge. She plans on pursuing a PhD with a focus in education among lower-income and marginalized communities. Next, we have Benjamin Mason, an artist, activist, and musician. Benjamin has been involved in various aspects of community organizing and activism since the age of 9, working in groups such as the Chicago Grassroots Curriculum Task Force, where he worked alongside organizers and activists to aid in citywide curriculum rehabilitation. Also assisted the Chicago anti-eviction campaign in its pursuit to unite the rampant homeless populace of the city to the past vacancies, speckling the cityscapes. Has also worked through his participation in the World Scholars Program of Village Leadership Academy and has worked with Blocks Together and worked in collaboration with Westside residents in the Youth Gang Database Project. We also have Valentina Turner, a sophomore at Agnes Scott College in Decatur, Georgia, former Posse scholar who intends to major in public health, has worked with multiple nonprofits in the Illinois Caucus for Adolescent Health as a youth facilitator, and She Crew, which mentored youth, founder of an after-school enrichment program for young girls of color do career exploration, and a participant in one of the first For Youth and by Youth podcasts, SheCast. We also have Anthony Tamich Pochel, whose background as a Cree and Lakota has influenced his efforts to serve community in Chicago. Through land-based education, Anthony works to ensure that community does not lose its connection to the land. It helps community members plant medicine gardens in their own backyards to maintain that connection. Began his involvement with the Center for Native American Youth in 2015, served as youth ambassador for President Obama's Generation Indigenous Initiative. In 2018, was recognized as a champion for change, and currently services the Youth Advisory Board as well as United National Intertribal Youth Executive Committee. We also have Kathy Duarte Gastelum, who received her Doctor of Philosophy in Mexican American Studies from the University of Arizona. Her research focuses on structural inequities that Latinx students encounter throughout their educational career. A proud graduate of the formerly banned Raza Studies at, just what I was talking about with Tucson, yeah, the Tucson Unified School District. Schoolwork experience includes working as a high school English teacher at her alma mater, a curriculum specialist at the University of Arizona, and adjunct faculty at Pima Community College and East Carolina University. Has presented her research at several national academic conferences, including ARA and, of course, CRISEA. We also have Yaribel Mercedes, whose career began 13 years ago as a New York City teaching fellow. Her journey as an educator evolved from classroom teacher, grade leader, mentor, and literacy coach before transitioning to an educational administrator. Serves as an academic response team specialist at the New York City Department of Education's Manhattan Borough Citywide office. As a Black woman, she understands the impact of race on education, and her passion and purpose are grounded in her commitment to disrupt racist and oppressive systems, structures, and policies that marginalize and minorize Black, Indigenous, racialized students of color. Born in the Heights, proud mother of two beautiful children, Isaiah and Scarlett, who's a light and fire in her life. And last but not least, we have Mohammed Al-Zargani, doubling in mathematics and Maine studies at Northwestern University. Post-graduation, plans on getting a PhD in math and hopefully becoming a mathematician. So like I said, we have just a incredible collective here of intellectual and cultural and social expertise. And I think we should just go ahead and get started with our conversation. So given all that, I'm going to open this up just to everybody. And this could be a positionality, perspective question, but generally speaking, what brings you to this panel today? What is your inspiration and focus for engaging in this dialogue? And I'll open that up to all of you.
Okay, I want to keep the awkward silence short, so I'll start. I just want to say, I think what brings me to this work in particular is just a lot of it is how I was brought up. I asked a lot of questions from a very young age about why, people of different ethnic backgrounds and age groups were all treated differently based off of the differences and dynamics and, this hierarchical archetype that I was being brought up in. And I was always asking these questions, and my mother, she understood that it was important for these questions to be answered. So I started to become a pillar in my community. I started speaking on panels with Northwestern Chicago Grassroots Curriculum Task Force. I just have a real passion for seeing people actually according to how they learn things and not how they're supposed to learn things and how we're taught to learn things, because learning is a difficult concept to teach. And I think I'll just keep it short. So that's really what brings me to this work. And I've also had a pleasure of working with some of these people here too.
No, I appreciate that. That's great perspective.
I think for myself, just bringing a unique perspective. Oftentimes, when we're in these conversations, we um, leave out one of the most critical voices, and that's of Native people. And as someone who is Native and who is Black, um, going just my experience throughout school has been very different. And it's been very different from Native children who go to schools that are on the reservation. So just going to schools with, just Native kids, to children who go to boarding schools. And then, going to Chicago public schools most of my life, and staying in Chicago for college. Just the being the only Native person either in my classroom sometimes, and just seeing how some teachers would um, interact with me or turn to me as like the expert, when the month of November rolls around. But then also some of the experiences that I faced inside of school that weren't so much um, from teachers, but things like administrators and counselors and things that I had to deal with there. Those things aren't often talked about. And Chicago has one of the largest Native populations in America, and so I'm here to bring that perspective, and to just let people know what's up and kind of a little bit about my experience.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Um, I have gone to school in Chicago my whole life. I've lived in Chicago for my whole life. And moving out here to suburban Georgia was really, really different. Um, Hearing the politics and kind of the rhetoric around critical race theory was shocking to me. And I think it's important for me to kind of bring that perspective here and discuss how having race and discussing race in the classroom is really impactful and can be beneficial for all people.
So growing up, I come from Dearborn, Michigan, which is the majority Arab population, and then I came here to a private white institution, Northwestern University, and so I feel like looking through my experiences, I kind of have like I can now compare and contrast the various differences and the various experiences and the way that I've seen race come up in multiple of my in both of these environments and how that's kind of played a role in my education.
Thanks.
Yeah, I also grew up in Michigan like Muhammad. And more specifically, I grew up as like a mixed race kid and in two separate households. So partially in my mother's white side of the family and then on my dad's Pakistani side of the family. And so I've had the experience of both being part of like a white family and part of like a family of color and also an immigrant family. And in school, while living in pretty close to Detroit, went to a primarily white school. And then after moving to Ann Arbor, Michigan, mostly went to a very like diverse school, but still experienced a lot of the impacts of things like different tracks and stuff for school and how most of my classes were with like white students and no other people that really looked like me. And then, yeah, also at an elite white institution now and feeling the effects and impacts of that.
Thank you. And I'd like to allow our educators on the panel an opportunity. Please respond to that question.
Sure. I think just like these scholars, I share in the sentiment of my lived experience being what brings me to the work. And after learning, critical race theory and having more questions and thinking about why things happened to me as a young girl, why was I put in particular programs, just making sense of why I have even belief systems about my worth, about my intellectual capacity brings me to this work. My belief in the purpose of education. Oftentimes we conflate education with it being something that moves the economy and not returning to humanizing the experience. And I just feel deeply responsible that if I have the awareness now, if I learn these things, it's something that I have to give to the world as someone that's part of the community garden of humanity. So that's what brings me to this work. That's what keeps me in the work. My children ground me in the work as Black babies in predominantly white schools, and what they've experienced, what my daughter experienced in kindergarten, and how I just have to always show up. So that's what keeps me, sustains me, and also gives me the fire to keep going.
Yeah, and along with, what my colleagues have said today, it's just the lived experiences that I've had. As Miguel mentioned, I am a proud graduate of the Rasta Studies program in Tucson Unified School District. That program just changed my life. So now I feel like I have to go out there and be that change maker and change lives too in high school and in university settings. I've taught from K through 12. Right now I'm a high school English teacher. And teaching at University of Arizona and Pima Community College, I see how important the work is, especially because of all the scrutiny that ethnic studies has as a whole, especially in the state of Arizona. So I'm kind of behind the scenes, tying in that race work, tying in those articles, because I want to expose my students to that type of knowledge. So that's really what keeps me there, is that I want to be that change maker for my students, how I was changed as a junior in high school. That was when the first time that I ever read an author from someone who looked like me, who had a last name like I did. So that's what really keeps me grounded in this work.
Thank you. I've done a lot of research on the ethnic studies ban in Arizona, and it's just a really insidious nature of events that occurred there. So I really appreciate your perspective. I want to direct this next question to the students on the panel, and I want to ask you guys about your school experiences and what is the impact that race and your racial identity has had in those experiences, and particularly in terms of the way that stories have been told or not told in the classrooms that you've occupied.
I think for me as a lot of what I witnessed in the classrooms, I've been in a lot of different classrooms. I went to like different grammar schools, different elementary schools, different high schools, and they've all been very different experiences. I went to Catholic school to start off my grade school experience, and that was very interesting. They really teach you a very regimented method of absorbing information and computing it and sort of just regurgitating it. And I found myself in the school there that was just really it was like I was one of those spiders off the matrix, just moving information around and going into the loop every day, and it was a lot. I remember after I started doing my work in education with my mother, I began to parallel a lot of like what I was learning in the education work to what I was actually getting in the classroom. And it was like there was this huge vacuum of where it should be in the classroom of actual things that were happening in my life that I kind of needed guidance on, and that I wasn't getting the guidance I needed with. And it definitely made me hit the work. I was working on books or anything, just trying to push forward. I remember at the very time we were working on a book called Urban Renewal, or backwards. But it was just interesting seeing all these colors all over the city talk about the city's actual history, comparing it to this. We're coming from Britain, you know what I mean? Coming into a nation that already has lands and people and culture, and sort of pressure washing it European ideology and view of the world. It was just shocking to me how warped and shifted the view had become from the native view to the European view, even with how we deal with figures like Columbus. You know what I mean? And it's been even more interesting to watch how we try to plan all that. I don't want to drone on too long. So.
Yeah, and I think you provided some really key context there because I know you guys have had a lot of educational experiences throughout various institutions. So when thinking about this question, please, feel free to just whatever really kind of resonates with you. If there's a particular moment in time or contemporary, just really, when that question is posed, what resonates with you most.
For myself, I think back to like two very specific moments that I've had in my education. One was in elementary school, and it was the first time someone had called me the N word in the school, and the teacher had done nothing about it. And the second time in high school, when we had a student teacher had come into our classroom, and one of the exercises she had proposed was for us to read from the perspective as a Klan member. And that is something that I absolutely refused to do. And I was like, I'm not doing this. And I had gotten in trouble and I had gotten sent out to the hall. Um, uh, and in that instance, like I was, I was in high school, and I was a junior, so I was already doing the work, and so I had no problem standing up for myself and giving that teacher an earful. But that one particular instance of me, like in the schools, were defying the teacher, um, kind of followed me for like the 2 months of high school. So it was like this big thing. Um, and so those are two moments that like I always think back to when someone's like, "Oh, what experiences have you had in school that were negative?" And those two things always pop in my head. But also, like growing up, learning my culture, my native culture, something that we're always doing is when we're learning in context. So if we're going to learn about the land or learn about the plants, we're going to, you know, be on the land or be around the plants that we're learning on. And that's not the same in Western education. You're stuck in a box and you're facing forward, learning from the teacher. And so the way that I was taught growing up, while simultaneously going through a Western education, were also very different. And as a young person, that's also very confusing because you're like, well, which way do I go? Um, but as you get older, you kind of learn like how to balance both of those and how to navigate those two very different cultures that you have to be in. Um, and one of the things um, that I'm thinking about is like when you're in school, constantly having to stand up for yourself. So when I mentioned before, when November comes around, and this has happened to me every single year that I've been in school, you turn into the Indian expert in the classroom. I think schools, they talk about like two or three different tribes. They talk about like Cherokees, Navajos, and Lakota, or they call them Sioux. And people always like turn around and look at you, and they expect you to like answer all their questions. And I was just talking to my brother before this, and he mentioned how his social studies teacher wanted him to do a specific project on Billy Caldwell for a history fair, right? And so um, teachers turning to you to be the expert when you're there to learn from them, but also them not holding native knowledge on the same standards as Western knowledge. And so they constantly are referring to my knowledge, my ancestral knowledge of the land and of the creation of my people as myths and legends. When I know that not to be true, right? And so it's having to deal with those little things in school. Um, and I don't want to use the term like pick your battles, because like I fully believe that every battle is worth it because the people around you are going to experience um, and hear what you have to say, and it could very well change their way of thinking. But uh, it does get like exhausting having to constantly explain yourself and to teach things when you know you shouldn't have to, but in the current state that we're in, we do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I think the fight for our identity in classrooms is something that I think we all, have struggled with at one time or another. For sure. I appreciate that.
I think for me, and especially more after I moved to, okay, I think there's feedback. I think somebody's mic is on. Okay. Okay, it's better. I think for, okay, never mind. It's still not better.
Yeah, if we could all just mute while Kasha is talking, that might help the issue, please.
Okay. I think it's better. I still hear a little bit of feedback, but I'll just try and hopefully you all can hear me. But I think for me, especially in like middle and high school, within the education system itself, I feel like I felt really invisible because one, I'm mixed race, but I'm also like South Asian. And so for me, none of the stories that occurred in school ever revolved around me, which I guess is like, okay, that's fine. But I do recall like in English class, I think I complained to one of my friends, like, oh, like there's never any stories about like, South Asians or any Asians to begin with. And he kind of just went, well, yeah, in America, it's about Black people and white people, and that's it. There's like nobody else. And for me, that was like really disheartening to hear. And I just recall always being racially mistyped and ethnically mistyped, even after I'd explained to people who I am and what I am. For some reason, it made sense to them to think that I'm Arab, even though I'm not. And especially when I was wearing hijab, it was that intersection between like discrimination around gender, race, and religion. And I just recall like so many cases of like in middle school on the bus, some kid was talking about, oh yeah, all Pakistanis are terrorists. And I yelled at the kid. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, why would you even say that? And all the other kids on the bus were yelling at me for calling out this kid for his bullshit. And when I got to school, like I broke down. Like I was very, very upset by this. And I had talked to my like homeroom teacher and she's like, you should go to the principal. Like, this is not okay that like that kid would say that and that everybody else would stand up for him and not for you. And I went to the principal and what ended up happening is nothing happened to the kid. In fact, we were both made to apologize to each other by like the counselors. And so for me, that was just like really upsetting because I was basically told like, oh, well, you were also the problem in this case. And I don't know, I just recall like so many cases in high school where it's like, oh yeah, like you look like a porn star because you're Muslim. Oh yeah, like you should do this because this is like what your background is. And like for me, I don't think too much of that changed since coming to college. I don't really like bond too well with my religious identity because of those stereotypes, but also because like in some of my classes that are supposed to be based on like some kind of race or ethnicity, like I took a class last year or my freshman year that was supposed to be partition literature, so South Asian literature. The teacher was white, and whenever any of the students tried to bring up, and all the students were South Asian like me, whenever anybody tried to bring up anything that they wanted to talk about in relation to the literature, specifically about like issues between Pakistani and Indian identities, the professor always like pushed us down and was like, no, this is what we're going to talk about. And so again, it's disheartening that like my experiences, my stories, and those of people that are like me always get pushed down in the context of education.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Is there anybody else who wants to respond to that question?
I would like to respond.
Okay.
And although I haven't had, I feel so sorry that you all have had to had those experiences in your educational careers. Yeah, Chicago, it's quite segregated. So I went to predominantly children of color schools. I went to predominantly Latinx and African American schools. And I wouldn't say that race had a huge impact on the um, the stories that were told, but it definitely had an impact on my accessibility to it. I was allowed to take ethnic study courses in my high school. However, it was only a small percentage of us that had to be allowed into the course. It was a great course. We walked routes, we discussed different things around Black history, but it was definitely only a small percentage of us that weren't getting that whitewashed version of history that we usually would get in most history. Um, and I remember there being no Latina studies at my particular high school. And I don't remember learning anything about natives until seventh grade, where I read the Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. And I think that was all of my education on indigenous people in school. So I think I definitely didn't have the access that I needed to really feel informed about the history of race and how things came to be in America.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that is, I can definitely share. I've had similar experiences across my educational journey. I want to direct this next question first to our educators on the panel. And I'd like to ask you, from your personal perspective, what does good teaching about race in the classroom look like?
Doing it. I think oftentimes like we shy away from having conversations about race, and really discussing oppression, and the way that power and privilege, and examining power and privilege in the classroom. And something to what Kathy said earlier about like what brings her to the work and having so many people that have taught us, right, that have changed our lives, our teachers across, my life, whether they have been in a classroom setting or in a kitchen table. Part of the most profound work for me was really examining my identity, understanding race, understanding the difference between race, ethnicity, and culture, and not to conflate those things, which also made me kind of like go deep into, how I've been conditioned, how I've been socialized, and how the education system, or as I like to call it, schooling institutions, really had a major impact on that. So I think the importance for us as educators is to not shy away from talking about race, from centering race. In fact, I think it's critical and so important and central to the way that we develop curriculum, to the ways in which we develop pedagogy in a classroom. The amazing Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings has 3 pillars: academic success, cultural competency, and social political consciousness. And a lot of the times when folks talk about quote unquote equity, they talk about academic success and cultural competence, but they don't really dive deep into that 3rd pillar, which is like social political consciousness and thinking about our students and how they're going to be citizens in the world, and thinking about their part of that social political consciousness is them examining power and privilege and talking about race. So for me, when I'm supporting educators across, districts and communities that I serve, is just guiding them and supporting them and not shying away from conversations about race, which are very uncomfortable. But the work has to be twofold. Like I heard Anthony say, every November that comes around, teachers expect him to be the expert, or, this sense of invisibility. Just as we are providing, that social political consciousness in a classroom, we also have to do it as educators. We have to be historians. We have to know the histories of our students. We have to ask the questions, because if we are not doing those things, then the script is what's going to guide your curriculum and pedagogy. And we know what the script has done and what it continues to do specifically to Black, Indigenous students of color. There's big business in the failure of Black students. There's big business in the industries of intervention. Dr. Goldie Muhammad, whose framework I keep close and dear to my heart, Cultivating Genius, she has us think about, in many sessions that I've been with her, about how we often talk about proficiency levels with students. Like, students are 10% proficiency according to these standards, but we're never talking about how the curriculum and our pedagogy is only 10% responsive to the students in the classroom, and learning about them and really being historians of our students. So much of what these scholars have said resonates with me, because that's what continues my learning, because I'm always in the pursuit of learning, because that's important for us as educators. But we can't shy away from talking about race in a classroom. It actually has to be central. That's my personal belief.
Yeah, and excuse me, I completely agree with Yadi, that race has to be at the center of the curriculum. And yes, it is very uncomfortable. And like for me, it's about that building rapport with our students, like, letting them know, like, hey, you might get triggered. This is going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's okay. We're going to work through this together. And I also offer students, to contact me if, if they're getting anxiety, or if something happens and they're really triggered, like, okay, let's talk about it and see what, we can build from there. But for me, the foundation is, starting with that, building the rapport, allowing them to feel comfortable with me and with their peers in the classroom, so we can have these conversations and, navigate this together as a class. So that way they don't feel like they're being left behind, or that they don't have any resources available or someone to talk to if they are triggered or if something else comes up.
Thank you. And I think it's really important that we also get a student perspective on this question, based on your classroom experiences. So is there anyone who'd like to share for that one?
I guess just to share like an experience that I had. I was taking an anthropology course at city colleges. It was actually at Harold Washington, and we briefly touched on like Native people, and we like took a test, and like some of the questions that were on that test were were questionable, and I was like, this isn't okay. And then like some of the answers to those questions were like very wrong, but it was what we had learned in the text. And I had emailed my professor, and I was like, hey, I had taken, I had grabbed the questions from the test, I had sent them to her, and I was like, hey, these questions aren't okay. Plus, these answers are wrong. And I was able to have a conversation with her, and she let me know. She was like, "This is what we're teaching this semester, but I'll make sure and I'll bring it up to the department head, so by next semester something like this doesn't happen again." And that was the very first time that I had an interaction with one of my educators that was that easy. Like, hey, this is wrong, and then them being like, oh, damn, okay, and then correcting it right away, and not even like asking me to help correct it, so like not putting that emotional labor on me, and going out of their way to find correct answers, and just like different resources that they can use to teach their class. And just acknowledging you know the different perspectives that you have in your classroom. I think what a lot of uh, educators sometimes just overlook is that a lot of students have a mixed identity, and so whatever or however that student may look, oftentimes they'll erase that student's other identity, right? And so I'm both Black and Native, but oftentimes in education, my Native identity would get erased, and that's something that I grew up with the most. I grew up on my native side of the family, so a lot of the things I do and how I act is influenced by my native culture. And going into classroom, that's erased. And oftentimes, teachers don't take the time. In my experience, they didn't take the time to learn about who I am or the culture that I came from until it benefited them in some type of way, i.e., like their lesson plans or something like that. And so, um, not being so like transactional, um, I think schools and institutions like universities are a place where um, a lot of us have to go and a lot of us want to go to them, but we want to make sure that we're giving them positive experiences. So we're wanting to go back, and we're retaining, um, Native students or Black students going into university, right? Because if I have a negative experience, I'm going to go back to my community and I'm going to talk about that negative experience, and that might deter students who are exactly like me and be like, oh, well, why would I want to go into higher education if they treated Anthony like this? I'm just going to go do something else.
Thank you. And Mohammed, I know you wanted to share something on this question as well.
Sorry. Yeah, I did want to say, so growing up in a majority Arab school, it wasn't until like my senior year of high school where I looked back and I realized, hold up, these teachers, like for example, the English teachers, a lot of them, despite having a majority Arab class, did not provide readings from Arab authors. And it was like, wait, why? Like, it didn't add up. Why are you not providing Arab students a chance to read about Arab identity or read from Arab authors or anything like that? And I guess this does tie into the previous question. Um, and even like other, like just non-white authors in general. Um, I think we would read, like, for example, letters from Birmingham jail. But other than that, I don't think we really read a lot of Black authors or Native authors. And it was like just making sure that if your class is majority, like, or if your class is majority South Asian, for example, make sure that you include texts that they can see themselves in, you know? Make sure you include just people of color in general in your work. So I thought that was a little bit weird once I entered into college and I was like, wow, I'm actually reading stuff that Arabs wrote. So, yeah.
No, thanks. I appreciate that. Um, I want to open this one up to everybody because I think this is a really important question to consider as we think about the schools and the educational spaces that we occupy. And that is, how can we view culture, race, and heritage and racial identity as a resource in the classrooms? Because it's often not viewed that way. So, how do you think we can kind of change the narrative to view those components as a resource in our classes?
I think like using people's cultural identities is like a huge resource in the classroom because like even like I've always just had ideas ways to implement it. Like I remember I used to think of like having like a bounty hunt. Whoever knows certain things about certain cultures, throw it in, you know what I mean? Like open up the space to more information and like create a flow so that everyone's learning and you're also sharing so you feel ingrained in the space. You know what I mean? You feel rooted. And I think that being a resource, everyone has a different way of contributing. You know what I mean? And we need to be sensitive to that because um, the world as it is right now is very sensitive. And I think that hearing people's personal stories, hearing their family stories of from their homeland and how that really shifts things here in this amalgamation of cultures. You know what I mean? Because like a lot of things with the race with the subject of race itself, it's a double-edged sword, especially with mixed people, because you have a lot of people who are black and white. You have a lot of people who are native and European. A lot of people who are like, you know what I mean, from the diaspora or their second generation, and all these little disconnects disjoin us on a very unique level that like isn't really comparable almost to any other generation, because we're just so far past this barrier, and it's like we're the only ones who can fill up the space with information that we hold. And just people contributing their experiences, like I was saying. And I think that the more information students can contribute, that should be a bigger factor on their grade than their ability to regurgitate. You know what I mean? Because it's like one part about learning is actually taking in the information, but another part of it is externalizing it and making use out of it. You know what I mean? And I think that's a very crucial ideology that a lot of people overlook. And it's not just about, you know what I mean, like a lot of people come into this work with the idea we have to bash the white man down so we can dig ourselves back up again. And I think that that's a very like crude interpretation of what this work means to people, because I think that it's more so about education, period. You know what I mean? Everyone is entitled to this, but we need to make proper use of it. You know what I mean? It's a tool, and not a tool to overpower or like, you know, be conniving with, but to help unify us in the separation that we find ourselves in as a people from our homelands and from our stories. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. That was a phenomenal answer. I really appreciate your perspective there. And I actually want to flip this over to the educators on the panel, because I know this is something that you are doing on a regular basis. So if you could just provide some context on how you make that a reality, some of the ways that you make that real for your students in the classroom, I think it'd be beneficial for others to hear.
Well, for me, the biggest thing is, like Anthony mentioned earlier, like teachers have, pretty much tokenized him at, particular times of the year. So for me, it's just like bringing in that knowledge that students have, but not just when it's going to benefit me, like just sending out simple surveys, like what books do you read, what authors do you like, what even music do you like, so I can just gauge their interest, and then I can tie in those authors into my class, and so that we can all get a different perspective. But that's my way of allowing the students to have a voice in the class and not just following the general curriculum that I'm assigned. Like, for example, this year I was just given like this whole set of modules, and it's just like, yeah, there's Edgar Allan Poe, there's Helen Keller, there's Shakespeare, and I'm just like, do I have to follow this? And they're like, no. I'm like, all right, let's see what else we can tie in here, because I'm not gonna do that. I wouldn't have done it anyway, but that would have been like low key behind the scenes stuff. But yeah, just like having the students' voices in the classrooms, like having the authors and articles that they like, even if it's not like a formal book, just even a blog post, just so we can have the students have their voice in their education, because that's so important. Even though, yes, I am the teacher, I have letters behind my name, but let's have your student voice in there too. What do you like? I'm learning from y'all too. Like you're not just, learning from me, I'm learning from y'all too. So I think it's just really important to take in the student voices and, even their caretakers, and then inviting them in the classroom, inviting them to, events when they're, we're in person or even virtual, so they can feel welcomed in the class. And that goes back to earlier when I said building the rapport, doing simple things like that. It really makes a world of a difference. And I'll just lastly add in, just listen to your students, please. It's so heartbreaking, and being, a high school teacher and also college teacher, when the students come into class and they tell me, this is the first time I ever felt heard. And it's just so heartbreaking. So listen to them. If they say they're not feeling well, follow up with them the next day. How are you feeling? And, because when you remember things like that, they appreciate it. Go to their sporting events. it makes a world of a difference, just those little things.
And if I may just add on to what Kathy's saying, it is my belief that teaching is the habitual act of learning and love. And you cannot have those things if you're not listening. And I think that, you all are such an invaluable resource to the classroom because teachers should be facilitators of learning, not experts of the learning. We are learning alongside, our students, alongside the communities and the families that we serve. So as part of your pedagogy, as part of your instruction, as part of your units, how are you bringing in your community? How are you bringing in your families? How are students part of the co-construction of the work and the pedagogy and the books? Right? Because what so often happens is that we get these scripts that are written by big companies that's mostly white men and women. And we know that these curriculums are deeply entrenched in whiteness and continuing this myth that Dr. Stovall talks about, like this myth that we continue to be indoctrinated with. And we as teachers have to be committed to teaching the truth. And part of teaching the truth is that our students have to tell the truth and tell us about the truth and be able to share in their experiences and really think about the wealth of brilliance and knowledge in our communities. Because oftentimes, I've been complicit in this. And even as I think about when I started in education, I always talk about I was so deeply entrenched in this saviorism. I want to go back to my community because I got out. And I laugh about that now, but it's just my community was beautiful. My community was brilliant. My community was genius. And oftentimes the erasure and the invisibility leads us to believe that those things are not real. So I would say, yeah, you guys should be in parallel with us in terms of pedagogy, instruction, partners, curriculum writers with us, because curriculum should not be universal. It should actually be led by the students that are in any learning spaces that we are in.
No, thank you. That's, it's just really, really powerful and meaningful to hear from people doing the work, how it can and should look like in the schools that we occupy. As a CRT scholar, I'm often thinking about intersectionality with the students I work and the research that I do. So with that in mind, I want to ask you, outside of race, what points of your identity have been most meaningful in shaping your experiences in school? And that could be at any point during your educational trajectory.
I think. Oh,
No, go right ahead.
okay. I think I mentioned before. I think gender, especially, and then also religion, have been really impactful, specifically in high school, middle school. Fetishization is that the word? I feel like that's been a really the intersection of all my identities is that's where that occurs. And I mean, for me, I guess you guys could tell I was getting upset while telling those stories before. I think those have been the most impactful in my K through 12 education. I think since coming to Northwestern, though, it's definitely been my socioeconomic identity. I come from a low income, first generation background. My mom, my dad's not really in my life, but my mom, she never went to college. I can't afford to go to this college if it weren't for financial aid. I'm on a full ride. And so all of my friends are first generation and low income. I literally can't relate to anybody who doesn't have to worry about paying to go to college. I mean, I've tried making friends from a variety of backgrounds, but I just don't think they understand or will ever understand. I guess what that struggle is like, the intersection of race and the socioeconomic identity.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's real. That's not real. Did you have something?
I was just gonna say, I think like for me, it's just been really huge because I've been to so many different schools. Because I remember the first school I went to, which was a Catholic school, it was a lot of foreign people from foreign countries who came to this country attending this school, being taught by white people, which just now I think about it, now that I say it out loud, it just sounds so crazy. Um, but a lot of it is just like I realized that Europe has utilized Christianity as this ingenious, you know what I mean? Let me add quotes because I don't actually mean it's ingenious, but this ingenious form of colonization, you know what I mean? When it used to be the spiritual tool that centered people and humbled them. But now it's just this form of colonization that's been implanted in people's homelands, and it's been used to draw them over here to Americanize and assimilate their mindsets. And it meant very different things from the next school I transitioned to, which was only white suburban kids. And that was interesting because it's like now at the other school, I was the only African American person there, which was very different because you saw a lot of people from different cultures just clustered. Ghanaians cluster with Ghanaians, Ethiopians cluster with Ethiopians, Vietnamese, Thai. You know what I mean? They all just clustered with people from their own cultures because they flocked to this school. But with the suburbanites, you see that a lot of our dynamic was just class. You know what I mean? And that was a whole other era of my life where I was just dealing with this whole class barrier because it was like if you wanted to go to the school picnic, you needed to have, $80 for every kid. You know what I mean? You need to have all this other stuff. It was just ridiculous. And then also the difference in curriculum was just absolutely astronomical. I went from having to stay up all night doing homework every day to having two sheets. When it's just like a sheet you tear out of a workbook and you just go home, you do it, you get a good grade. You know what I mean? It was so easy to get good grades at this suburban school. You know what I mean? And eventually I left there and I went to Village Leadership Academy because I just wasn't challenged enough. And I even told my own mother, like, this isn't challenging me enough. I need something like to intellectually stimulate me. But then I went to Village Leadership Academy, and that was interesting because that was my first time. I had dealt with African Americans, but these were kids from the South Side, and I hadn't really been on the South Side as much. I'm in like fifth grade at this point because I had grown up on the North Side, and so it was just this huge culture shock dealing with how like Black kids like me are. You know what I mean? And it was just like, wow, like, so this is and something clicked when I transferred there. I was like, this is why a lot of these foreigners feel a certain way about us because they're being told by all these white people how African Americans are, and they avoid us thinking that we're somehow their enemy. But really, it's just they see this portion of us and they write the rest of it off, sort of. And I know I'm going on a bit, but I just thought it was important. And then I went to high school. That was a whole other thing because then I entered CPS, which was just totally wild. But needless to say, it's just been a different kind of like rock has been thrown in my clockwork at every school I've been at, and for a different reason, for a very different reason at every place I've been to. And it's just been a kaleidoscopic experience, to say the least.
No, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And I appreciate everybody on this panel. It's been just an amazing experience learning and building with y'all. It's been an Illmatic, Enter the Wu-Tang, Aquemini, Five Mic Classic, having this great conversation with you guys. But I want to, because you guys have such amazing perspective on these issues, open it up now for Q&A so some of the audience can ask you guys some questions about everything we discussed today. And I think the questions are going to roll in here momentarily, so give me a second.
Also have the mic for anyone who wants to do a question here live.
I don't have a question. I just want to say thank
They can't hear you with the mic. Thank you. I don't have a question per se. I just wanted to say thank you for taking our time to share your experiences, for reliving traumas that you went through during your educational career, and for being so brave and bold, for being honest about what needs to change. So thank you is all I wanted to say. Y'all did such a good job, but they don't have questions.
Literally just killed it. Mic drop.
You all did amazing. The question I have is, if you had $1 million to build your own educational institution, what would it include? What would it sound like, feel like? What do you envision?
I think for myself, I like questions like this because I like to dream and dream big a lot. Just building a school that uses indigenous knowledge systems as a way to teach students, and not just Native students, right? Students from all different backgrounds, because the current place that we're all living on is, this is Native land, and so in order to sustainably and ethically live on our land, you should live on the land how the Native people have lived on this land since time immemorial. Um, and so, using Native and Indigenous educators, teaching them about our ways, and making sure that Indigenous knowledge systems and Indigenous ways of being are being held on the same standards as Western education and Western knowledge, because Native people and Indigenous people, we are scientists, we are authors, we are engineers, we are doctors, we're lawyers, and we. I believe that we do those things, and we do those things um, in a way that is true to ourselves and true to our culture, and which is something that keeps us grounded. So, doing things like that, um, like thinking about it, in school, why is it that we can learn Spanish and French and Mandarin? Why can't we learn Lakota, Anishinaabe, Algonquin? Why are we learning languages that aren't from this land, and not the languages that are from this land that are, you know, going extinct? And so using that to revitalize something that has been, you know, beaten out of Native people and bringing it back to the land that it's supposed to be on.
If we didn't have to pay for it, I'd drop this mic for you, sir. Other questions? Yeah. One more time? I just wanted to give time for more questions since we don't have only have a couple minutes left.
The censors.
The censor? Oh. Can the panel share some productive and affirming learning communities they have been part of?
Of course, Grisea. This is my home. Also, Chito, it's X-I-T-O, and that is based out of Tucson, Arizona, and it's also led by former teachers of the formerly ran Raza Studies program. There's actually an attendee here whom I met a couple years ago, and we connected again, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. So that's a really great community to be a part of. Also, for those of you in Chicanx or Latinx Studies, National Association of Chicano Studies, that's that's my second favorite. And it's a real like homey feeling, but that's more so specifically focused on like the Chicanx Studies programs.
Yeah, I guess for me is finding educators that are actually doing this work. I feel a sense of privilege, having the teachers that I've had, Dr. Mark Gooden, Dr. Terrence Green, folks that really poured so much into my continued pursuit of learning. The educators that are doing this work, Dr. Goldie Muhammad and her framework, Cultivating Genius, Dr. Yolanda Seeley Ruiz, partners and educators within your communities that are, wanting to do this work, wanting to be in the work of co-constructing things and not doing things in silos, because that's also one of the major problems in education is that teachers feel like they have to do things alone and in their classroom, and these are my kids, and this is my space. My space, taking it back. Not really what I meant. But yeah, you have to build, coalition and community where you can. You have to lean into educators that are already doing this work. I remember even thinking about one of my first classes with Dr. Horsford, where she made the analogy, like when you're going to a dinner party and there's conversations, that people are having, you're not just gonna jump into the conversation. You have to listen to what folks are saying to build. And I feel like our ancestors been giving us the smoke about what the work of true education should be. There's folks that have been doing this work for years. And so I lean in a lot to the communities that are doing this work, that are modeling this work, that are exemplifying this work, so that I can continue on the work that they have done, but also build and be an extension of their work. And hopefully, with you scholars, being, co-designers of this work, we really make change and freedom dream as to what, education should really look, sound, feel like for everyone.
I think we have time for one of the students to answer the question, please.
I would like to say something. Over the summer, I did Sojourner Scholars, and it is with Erica Davila, and it is an amazing program. And it was one of the most affirming spaces that I have been in with education, where I really delve into some of the African American history of Chicago that I didn't know about. And also, the Illinois Caucus for Adolescent Health is a really affirming space for me as well.
Shout out to our past president, Dr. Davila. Okay, Miguel, would you like to wrap us up?
Most def. So again, I want to thank everybody on the panel for their time. If we could just do another round of applause for each other and just the great work that was done. It was phenomenal. It was a true privilege to be a part of this. We'll definitely have this up on YouTube, so please widely share this with your networks. This was a conversation that needs to be repeated and built upon, so if you could share that, I appreciate it. And thank everybody for their time. We'll see you later. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Erica has some remarks.
You have a lovely weekend.
Oh.